It has stood for almost 2,000 years. It survived earthquakes, fires, and centuries of people tearing it apart for building stone. And every piece of it was raised without a single engine. No motors, no hydraulics, no machine as we would understand the word, 50,000 seats. Stone blocks as heavy as small trucks, lifted 50 meters into the sky by human muscle. This is how the Romans built the Colosseum. To understand it, you have to go back to a disaster. In the year 64, a great fire tore through Rome, and when the ash settled, the Emperor Nero did something the people never forgave. He took the ruined heart of the city, prime land where ordinary Romans had lived, and built himself a pleasure palace so vast it had its own artificial lake. They called it the Golden House. Rome seethed. Then Nero fell. Civil war followed, and a blunt, practical general named Vespasian seized power. He needed to win the city's heart, so he made a promise carved in stone. He would drain Nero's private lake, and on that exact spot, he would give the people the greatest arena the world had ever seen. Where a tyrant had kept a lake for himself, Rome would have a stadium for everyone. But the promise was easy. The build was almost impossible. They wanted the largest amphitheater ever attempted. 4 stories, a third of a kilometer around, holding tens of thousands. And they wanted to put it on the softest, wettest ground in Rome, the bed of a drained lake. Every engineer knows what happens when you build something enormous on mud. It sinks. So before they could raise a single arch, they had to solve the ground itself. And it had to be a perfect ellipse, not a circle, an oval, so that every seat faced the action below. The Romans laid it out with nothing but ropes, stakes, and geometry, using a simple surveying cross called a groma to keep every line true. No lasers, no computers, just string and mathematics, scaled up to a third of a kilometer around, and they got it very nearly perfectly symmetrical. First, the water. They cut a network of drains through the valley and channeled Nero's lake away into Rome's existing sewers. What was left was a vast, muddy scar in the center of the city, and an army of workers ready to dig. And dig they did. 6 meters down through the old lake bed, then 4 meters more into the clay beneath. 12 meters straight down, by hand, an oval trench 200 meters long. Then came the masterstroke. They didn't lay stone in that trench. They filled it with a solid ring of concrete 3 meters thick. The Colosseum doesn't rest on the ground of Rome. It floats on a raft of artificial rock the Romans poured for it. That concrete was their true secret weapon. The recipe: lime, water, and pozzolana, volcanic ash from the region around Vesuvius. Ordinary concrete crumbles in water. Roman concrete does the opposite. It sets underwater and it keeps growing stronger for centuries. We only worked out how it does that a few years ago. They were building with it 2,000 years before we understood it. For the skeleton, they chose travertine, a hard, creamy limestone from Tivoli, 35 kilometers east of the city. They would need an astonishing amount of it, over 100,000 tons, and each block was cut to weigh around 4 tons. Now they had a new problem. How do you move a mountain of 4-ton stones, 35 kilometers, with ox carts? You build a road just for the job. The Romans cut a dedicated wagon route from the quarries to the site and dragged the stone block by block on ox-hauled sledges. For years, a slow river of white stone crept toward the city, the raw bones of the arena, arriving one enormous piece at a time. And here's a detail that tells you how confident they were. Across much of the building, they didn't glue the travertine together with mortar at all. They carved sockets into the stones and locked them with iron clamps, around 300 tons of iron, holding the skeleton together by sheer precision of fit. Centuries later, desperate scavengers would chisel that iron back out of the walls. You can still see the holes today. Now the real question: how do you lift a 4-ton block 50 meters into the air with no engine on Earth? You become the engine. This is a treadwheel crane. Men climbed inside a giant wooden wheel and walked, and through a system of pulleys, their weight was multiplied into lift until a handful of men could raise a block heavier than a car. It was slow, it was dangerous, and it worked. thousands of times over, but a treadwheel crane could only reach about 13 meters. The outer wall would rise to nearly 50, so for everything above the crane's reach, they built timber scaffolding up the entire face of the building and lifted the stone in stages, hauling each block a little higher, platform by platform, until it reached the sky. The cleverest machine in the whole project wasn't the crane, it was the arch. An arch doesn't push straight down. It pushes its weight sideways into the arches beside it, so a whole ring of them holds up the tier above. 80 arches on every level, stacked 4 stories high. Repeat one simple, strong shape enough times, and you can raise a wall that carries itself and stands for 2,000 years. But there's a hidden trick to every one of those arches. You cannot build an arch in midair. The stones would fall before you set the last one at the top. So for each arch, the Romans first built a temporary wooden frame, curved to the exact shape, and laid the stones on top of it. Only when the final keystone dropped into place at the center did the arch lock together and become self-supporting. Then they knocked the timber out and carried it to the next arch, and the next hundreds of times. And because the design was so repetitive, they could build with factory-like speed. Standard blocks, standard arches, thousands of workers running the same operations in parallel. From the bare, drained lake bed to opening day was under 10 years, a pace that would embarrass many modern construction sites. We should be honest about whose hands did this. After Rome crushed the Jewish revolt and sacked Jerusalem, tens of thousands of captives were marched back to Italy. It was largely the enslaved who did the brutal work, the digging, the dragging, the endless climbing inside those wheels, while Roman craftsmen handled the skilled trades. The Colosseum is a monument to Roman engineering. It was also paid for in conquest and built on forced labor. Both things are true. The Romans weren't done being clever. On blazing summer days, they pulled a vast awning, the velarium, across the top of the arena to shade 50,000 people. It was around 24 tons of rope and canvas, rigged to masts around the rim. And who do you trust with a rigging that enormous? Not builders, sailors. 1,000 sailors from the imperial fleet were stationed beside the Colosseum for one job, to open and close the sky above the crowd. And none of this was the bare gray ruin we see today. In its prime, the Colosseum gleamed. The arches were framed in gleaming white stone. The upper walls were plastered and painted. Statues of gods and heroes stood in the openings of the middle tiers, and colored awnings billowed overhead. It was designed to dazzle you before the first fight even began. Then there was the crowd itself. 50,000 people, sorted by rank from the emperor at the front to the poorest at the top. To move them, the Romans built 80 entrances and a web of corridors and stairways called vomitoria, the ones that spew out. They could fill the entire arena or empty it in a matter of minutes. Modern stadium designers still study how they did it, and the spectacle demanded a supply chain that spanned the known world. Lions from North Africa, bears from the north, crocodiles, leopards, even elephants. Exotic animals captured, shipped across the Mediterranean, and kept alive in the city until show day. Feeding and moving that menagerie was a logistical operation worthy of an army. In the earliest years, the arena had a trick that sounds impossible. They could flood it. Roman writers tell us the early Colosseum was sealed and filled with water to stage mock naval battles, real boats and crews fighting it out on an artificial lake in the heart of the stadium. Which leads to the strangest twist in the whole story, because the most ingenious machine of all came later, and this part matters to get right. When the Colosseum first opened, the arena floor was solid and could be flooded. It was Titus's brother, the Emperor Domitian, who dug beneath it after the opening, and that is when the floods ended for good. He created a 2-level underworld called the hypogeum, a maze of cages, corridors, ramps, and machinery hidden under the sand. Down in that darkness, animals and gladiators waited. Above them ran a system of lifts and counterweights, hand-cranked by teams of workers. On a signal, a cage would rise, a trapdoor in the floor would snap open, and a lion, a bear, or an armed man would erupt into the daylight and the roar of the crowd, seemingly from nowhere. Special effects, staged 2,000 years ago, running entirely on rope, wood, and muscle. When it finally opened in the year 80, the Emperor Titus threw 100 days of games. A According to the Roman historian Cassius Dio, some 9,000 animals were killed in that opening festival alone. The Romans didn't even call it the Colosseum. To them, it was the Flavian Amphitheater. That nickname came much later. But on that first day, the greatest building in the world was handed to the people who, a generation before, had watched a tyrant flood the same ground for his own pleasure. It's worth sitting with what that spectacle cost. The arena that entertained a city was fed by conquest, by slavery, and by the deaths of countless people and animals on its sand. The Colosseum is genuinely one of the most brilliant things human beings have ever built. It is also a monument to how much suffering that brilliance was willing to spend, and how it became a ruin is a story of its own. For centuries after Rome fell, the building was used as a fortress, a church, and workshops. A massive earthquake in 1349 finally brought down its southern outer wall, and the fallen stone was carted away to build palaces and churches across the city. What you see today is the survivor, the strong inner skeleton that even 14 centuries of earthquakes and looting could not finish off. And yet, here it is, 2,000 years later, battered but standing, outlasting the empire that built it, the scavengers who stripped it, and nearly everything we have built since. No engines, no steel, no computers, just mathematics, volcanic ash, timber wheels, and an almost unimaginable amount of human labor. The old world was never boring.